Fintan, I want to start with this point you make about pity. Surely this is the first time you could find people in Ireland feeling pity for the United States.
Yeah, as you say, I'm in Dublin, and there's probably no country in the world that has such awe for America, such love for America, such affection. And I do think people are genuinely feeling pity. People know that most Americans didn't vote for Donald Trump, don't support Donald Trump. And we're all suffering in this crisis, but we're able to imagine what it must feel like to be locked down in a room with a malignant narcissist as your leader. We've seen before in human history, we've seen bad leadership, we've seen a vacuum of leadership. But I don't think we've ever seen anything in a crisis like this that approximates a leader who has been actively spreading a deadly virus, which is really what Trump has been doing by his actions, by the way he's been speaking out of both sides of his mouth at the same time, coming up with quack cures, using this as an excuse to make enemies. Not the slightest empathy. You look at leaders all over the world, and however bad they are, they at least feel they have to project some kind of good authority and some kind of empathy at this moment of crisis. And in the democratic world, there are crazy people out there, but in the democratic world, you can only think of Bolsonaro in Brazil and Donald Trump in the great United States of America, who's behaving in this way.
You make a point in your new piece in the New York Review of Books that Trump is struggling with two contradictory impulses, paranoia versus risk. Explain that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because you might think, well, actually, Donald Trump could reasonably claim to have been a kind of prophet of what we're supposed to do in the coronavirus crisis. He's a germaphobe. He washes his hands all the time. He has been on a campaign to stop people shaking hands. He hates coughing. He has all these kind of things going for him. And it's an interesting question as to why did he not get out ahead of this and say, look, I've always told you, I was the guy who my instincts were right about all this kind of stuff. And why couldn't he do that? Well, of course, he couldn't do it because he's drawn between, as you say, these two different forces. One is, and this is conservatism, right? Conservatism has used these two things. It uses paranoia, fear. There's danger out there. You really should be afraid, which you might think might suit Trump in a way in this crisis. But the counterbalancing one, of course, is this valorization of risk. Real men take risks, and it's to do with kind of rugged individualism. It's to do with certain kind of notions as to how the capitalist system works. It's to do with a certain kind of masculinity, isn't it? It's all this kind of stuff about it's only people who are afraid of the nanny state, only people who don't really understand freedom are not willing to take risk. So he's got these two things, and he's been pretty good at dealing with them in his own way up to this crisis. But of course, in a crisis like this, what you get then is an appallingly mixed message where he keeps encouraging the risk, keeps sending out the signals to people that they should revolt against their state governments and the regulations they're putting down on the one side, and on the other side feeling that he's the president after all and he has to tell people that this is very serious. So what you get is frankly frightening gibberish. It's a mix of messages that in this context just isn't entertaining, isn't funny, is actually deadly.